Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and welcome to this special edition of Scope. Thank you very much for joining us today. We are honored to be joined by the former president of Iran, Dr. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who served as the Iranian president from the years 2005 to 2013. Dr. Ahmadinejad, thank you very much for taking your time out to join us today here in Scope. We will be talking, of course, about your country's foreign policies in this interview. And I wanted to start, as you can imagine, Dr. Ahmadinejad, with the biggest issue which faces your country, and that is the nuclear deal and the nuclear negotiations. Now, even under your presidency, the nuclear negotiations were ongoing. I want to ask, what do you make of the final deal that was reached? In your opinion, was that a good deal?
Oh Allah, may you hasten the advent of your Savior and bestow upon him health and triumph, and grant us being among his supporters and those who spare no effort on the path of his advent. To you, your colleagues, and all the people who either read or watch this interview, a special hello and greetings from the depths of my heart, from the bottom of my heart, to the dear and reverend people of Pakistan. As you pointed out, the talks between Iran and several foreign countries are among the top issues in our foreign policy. In the past, there was a deal throughout these negotiations. That deal, because of not conforming to international laws and also not to accepted legal norms, not only didn't solve the problem, but also aggravated the issues even further and made it harder. In any agreement, there should be a balance between obligations and what you receive. So if this is to the benefit of one of the parties, this is not going to resolve anything, but will also make things worse. We saw that Mr. Trump unilaterally put the agreement aside, and none of the parties to the contract or to the agreement were able to do anything in this regard. Let me point out to a very specific case. In any agreement, dispute resolution is a very important issue. In this agreement, there are 6 countries on one side and Iran on the other. Dispute resolution is assigned to a 7-member council or committee. And in fact, it means there are 6 countries on one side and Iran on the other. But there is 7 votes needed, votes of consensus to resolve problems. So this will never do anything which is to the benefit of the Iranian nation. That's why the agreement was not successful. Today, the negotiations are ongoing. It is to go on like the past and on the same basis. It will surely be to the detriment of the Iranian nation, and the nation will surely not accept it. I've announced this before as well. Furthermore, the government, which is in these negotiations, is toward its end of this term in office, and it is at its lower level of acceptance and people's satisfaction. So it cannot represent the Iranian nation. Therefore, I have no hopes that through this current path, the problems be resolved. But the problem can be resolved in the atmosphere of respect and justice and in proper conditions.
Okay, so if I may, Dr. Ahmadinejad, I wonder then, you've said that the deal in and of itself was not a good deal and that you're not very hopeful going forward. If we talk specifically then about the bilateral relations of Iran and the United States, do you see light at the end of the tunnel now that we have a different president in office?
With the change in presidents of the United States, usually and unfortunately, there's no change in their foreign policy. If a change is observed, surely there will be hope. Otherwise, the principle should be based on resolving the problems. After all, the problem between the two countries should be resolved at a point in time. I think if both parties commit to justice and respect, then also consider the rights of our own nations, the problem can be resolved very soon. I believe that the wise people on both sides will soon do this.
But if I may, I wanted to ask, even under your tenure when you were president of Iran, sanctions were always a significant hurdle for your country, and they still are a significant hurdle for progress of Iran. Your country is currently under maximum pressure campaign that Donald Trump had enacted, especially at a time that it's been dealing with the pandemic. What do you make of this current situation of sanctions and whether that will ever be resolved?
Yes, as you said, the sanctions are ugly and immoral, and they have imposed a heavy pressure on the Iranian nation. I think two things should be done. First is the activation of the Iranian potential capabilities. Iran has been enjoying huge human wealth and also natural wealth, and in this sense it's very rich. So if these are activated, a prominent part of the sanctions will automatically be nullified. And the second one is making reforms in diplomacy and also international and foreign relations. Both among the neighboring states and also internationally, there are a variety of opportunities for developing the communications and also economy. I think the quick activation of this opportunity can change the situations greatly. And eventually, someday, the problems or issues between Iran and the US need to be resolved somehow. And the condition and what it is based on is justice and respect. Even today, if the US government stops its hegemony and its effort to plunder the wealth of the Iranian nation and other nations, the problems can soon be resolved.
All right, so Dr. Ahmadinejad, I wanted to, if you allow me, move on to some other world issues that are, of course, relevant to Iran. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that as somebody, of course, who has served as the president of the country. On top of that list is Palestine. What are your thoughts about what exactly can be done to issue or to ensure, in fact, I should say, a just resolution to that issue of Palestine?
We should go to the root cause of the problem. The root cause is the occupation of the people's land and also depriving them from the right to determine their faith, and also making millions of people refugees. So the resolution of the problem goes back to these issues. So if the national sovereignty right of the Palestinian people and also the right to determine their faith are both officially recognized, the way to solving the problem will be opened. My particular suggestion is to hold a referendum with all the people who enjoy a certain kind of right in the Palestinian territories participating. I think if this occurs, the problem would be solved from its root.
Okay, so also then the issue of Syria, Dr. Ahmadinejad, which is extremely important for Iran as well. What do you make of Iran's policy towards Syria? Do you think that needs to change?
I think for both the regional states and also world countries, there are two principles which need to be observed. First, recognizing their right to determine their destiny, that is for the nations, and also not meddling of any foreigner no country and no power. So for the Syria, it's the same thing. The Syrian nation should determine its own future, and no country and no power and no current from outside should meddle and intervene.
Okay, so on Syria as well, if I may come in, I want to bring in Russia into the conversation as well, because Iran and Russia have fairly good relations right now, and they agree on international issues such as Syria as well. How do you assess the relations right now between these two countries?
I've got the same stance. For Russia, it makes no difference. It is the Syrian nation who should choose. So if we, Iran and Russia, help the will of the Syrian people be implemented, that would be okay. And for Iran and Russia relations, I think all countries should have friendly relations and also constructive ones. This is my belief.
Okay, so Dr. Ahmadinejad, when you were president, your speeches at the United Nations, as I'm sure you know, have been debated a lot, and there've been people who've supported it and people who've spoken out against your speeches as well at the United Nations. But I wanted to get your thoughts about the United Nations itself as an international body. How do you assess whether or not the UN is able to fulfill its mandate equally for all of its member states?
As you know, the idea of the United Nations is a very modern one and is considered a huge achievement for mankind. I believe that the globe and the world needs to be managed jointly. And this means that all nations should participate in this process fully and in a free and friendly way. And this regards their participation in the management of the globe. But like other human values, such as freedom, democracy, and justice, unfortunately, the devilish satanic powers have, to some extent, digressed the United Nations from its main mission. I believe that we should interact with the UN and simultaneously make endeavors to reform its structure. I believe that in the UN, the General Assembly should be ruling. But today, unfortunately, the Security Council is ruling, with 5 countries enjoying a veto right. And this diverts the United Nations from its human missions. We can observe that today the United Nations is incapable of accomplishing its humane missions based on the UN Nations Charter. Today, this reform in the structure of the UN has turned into a global demand. And soon, with the will of the nations, these reforms will be implemented.
Okay, so if I may come to this region now, South Asia more, and I wanted to get your thoughts on occupied Kashmir and how important that issue is in your eyes. We know that Prime Minister Modi of India right now is getting ever closer to Israel and Israel's establishment and leadership. What should the Iranian stance be, and what should the stance of the rest of the world be towards the issue of occupied Kashmir and the people who are suffering there?
Human issues are general, so each and every human being is responsible toward the rights of other people and also the violation of their rights. Occupation and also depriving nations from the right to determine their fate is something extremely ugly and anti-human. I always feel sorrow for the people of Kashmir and consider them as really oppressed. I hope that soon, with the recognition of the right to determine their own fate of the people of Kashmir, they get the chance to choose their future. And I will do whatever I can in this regard and will spare no effort on that end. And I pray to God the Almighty that He also helps the people of Kashmir and also every other people around the world whose rights have been violated to achieve these rights.
All right, we're just going to go into a short break, but we will be back right after this break, continuing our conversation with Dr. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the former president of Iran. Stay tuned for that. Welcome back, viewers. You're still with Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi, and we're continuing our special edition of our show today, an exclusive interview with Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the former president of Iran. Okay, so let's move on, if we can, to the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. During your tenure as president, we saw a marked improvement with regional players, such as even Saudi Arabia, for example. I wanted to ask you, how important is it for all Muslim nations, Islamic nations, be they Arab or otherwise, to be able to work out their differences among themselves and to have rapprochement and good relations?
As you said, both among the nations that you named, and also among all countries, the principle and the foundation should be based on relationships and communications, cooperation and brotherhood. But the international hegemony and domineers, in order to dominate our region, need separation and disputes among countries and nations. And in this regard, they are making huge investments. They continuously sow discord, sell arms, and try to make us far from each other. Today, unfortunately, the situation and status quo is not a favorable one. In your mind, imagine a day when Pakistan, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and other countries are fully united. And just suppose what a genuine and huge power is going to arise in the world. This is going to be a genuine power, which is genuine for helping nations and also for brotherhood and peace worldwide. It's natural that the corrupt powers don't like such a power be created in our region. All of us shouldn't spare no effort to develop our commonalities and do away with differences. Our commonalities are dozens of times more than our points of difference, which, the latter is primarily induced by our enemies. I think this is the human duty and commitment of us, of anybody who believes in and is interested in humanity. And I think this is going to help the regional states be united better than before toward administering the region, and also carrying out joint projects in construction and development and progress. While the European states, with that background of tensions and widespread differences, can make a union, I believe it's very good, which is something very good. So why shouldn't we have a union like them and have a joint market and help each other and also support and cooperate with each other? I think our region enjoys a wealth of natural and human resources. It's the center of culture, and it's the cross-section of communications. So this is the best opportunity for governments and nations, and if they come together, this is going to be to the benefit of the regional states and also the world. I hope that this good idea pretty soon is realized and is going to serve the nations. Let me point out a simple example for the case of Iran and Pakistan. You know that the people of Iran and Pakistan, culture-wise, are very close to each other. Actually, right now, the Iranian government is importing both meat and rice and other needs from 15,000 kilometers away. This is why our dear Pakistani nation is just beside us, and we can easily and conveniently supply these needs. On the other hand, Iran can provide Pakistan with energy and technology, but because of the distance between the two governments, our people have been deprived of these opportunities.
I wanted to ask about the Afghan peace process. That is, of course, important to both Pakistan and Iran. I wanted to ask you about your opinion of the deal that was signed with the Taliban in Doha. How important is peace and stability in Afghanistan for your country, as well as on the fact that the Taliban may have power in an upcoming government?
I believe that the interventions of the U.S. government in our region are never to the benefit of the regional states. They're always pursuing their own interests. They openly say that in their policies, morality plays no role. They affiliate to the political Darwinism school of thought. They seek their progress in keeping others lag behind, of other nations, and their security, they seek it in insecurity of others, and for their welfare, they're seeking in the poverty of other nations. All their meddlings over the past 50 years in our region have been to the detriment of the nation's interests. These cause our being pessimistic toward all their measures they take. And we cannot trust that they wish to make any help to the regional nations. I think everybody should allow the great nation of Afghanistan, the oppressed nation of Afghanistan, to in a balanced and free situation, decide about their country and about their future. Of course, I believe such a day will soon arrive.
I'm going to come back to Iran and its regional role. As you know, your country has been criticized a lot by even regional countries as well as, of course, extra-regional countries as well about how it acts in the region and whether or not it is a responsible player for the peace and stability of this entire region. What are your thoughts on that?
As I said at the beginning of this interview, what I said applies to all countries, and especially regional countries, should watch that our brotherhood is the principle, and also the right to determine our faith and also national sovereignty. And this should not be violated. We should accept that security is something public in the region, and all of us should brotherly and under the twilight of justice and respect make a cooperation which is to the benefit of everyone. Countries like Iran, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey should continuously consolidate and fortify this sense of brotherhood and transfer it among each other and preserve it. I'm not saying that we should be the grand country in the region. Any state who has tried to be the grand one has caused damages. For example, Saddam tried hard to be the grand one, and he imposed several wars on the region, and then he had that bitter fate for himself. Our view should be, whether we are father, brother, or son, to preserve our roles and be beside each other. And if we don't do this, we're all gonna suffer damages. And the only side that benefits from this is going to be the enemy. This is my definite stance on this, and I've over and over announced that. And all of us need to go on like this. Regional competition will have no winner. And the only winner would be the enemies of the regional nations. And we should not compete in this way. And on the other hand, we should cooperate brotherly and constructively. This is the only way which is to the benefit of the nations and will bring about the prosperity for all nations, and it's going to safeguard it. Imagine a day when our scientists, industry, and craftsmen from Pakistan, Iran, Iraq, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, and other countries go hand in hand towards joint projects which are defined toward the improvement and construction of all countries. And this is going to activate the capabilities and potentials of nations. And just imagine what a huge thing is going to occur in the region.
Just as a final, if I may, Dr. Ahmadinejad, I know that your time is short as well, but I wanted to get your thoughts about something that a lot of the world is very curious when it comes to, especially around Iran's governing system and how exactly Iran governs itself. It's close to elections as well. This discussion always comes up. I don't want to talk about very detailed domestic politics, but I just wanted to ask your thoughts about the rest of the world's curiosity about how your country leads itself politically within itself and chooses its leaders. What are your thoughts about the misunderstandings that come up about the system that you serve under and you have served under?
I think all over the world, the administrative system should represent and be a symbol of the public will of the people, and should be a conduit for implementation of the will of the people. So whatever, and to whatever extent this mission suffers from a problem, the path of progress and national security of the nation would be problematic. The huge revolution of the Iranian nation was pursuing such a grand and humane goal. I think the mission of each and every Iranian is to safeguard this cause and this sacred goal, and this divine goal, sorry. I pray for all decision makers and those who are responsible to pass the test vis-a-vis the history and the Iranian nation. I do believe that both the world and Iran are on the verge of huge developments. The era of controlled democracies is toward its end. And the global community is getting prepared to enter the era of true freedom and true democracy. A democracy which comes in the form of the rule of all people to all people. A freedom which is going to be itself freed from the prison of from the imprisonment and limitations imposed by the powerful, the power mongers, and also the hegemonic powers.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmadinejad. We really appreciate you taking your time out to join us today here in Scope on Indus News. We appreciate, of course, you sharing your thoughts with us about the foreign policies of your country. We discussed quite a few topics. On top of the list, as we can imagine, was the nuclear deal. And on your opinions on that, you're not very supportive of the nuclear deal that was signed back in 2015. Nevertheless, of course, Donald Trump walking away from that deal was not something positive for your country either. Then we talked about the issue of sanctions and the effect that that had during your tenure, and still very much has an effect during this maximum pressure campaign that Donald Trump brought to the fore, and Biden is still very much continuing as your country is involved in the Vienna talks. We spoke as well about the relations between the United States and Iran, as well as Iran and a whole number of other countries around the world, such as the Russians as well, with which the Iranians have fairly good relations, and areas of mutual interest such as Syria and otherwise. Venezuela is probably on top of that list as well. We discussed your thoughts about Palestine and how exactly that can be resolved in a just fashion, and you spoke of a referendum which should be enacted there, and that is something that Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, has also spoken of in the past. We also spoke then about the controversies that arose during your time as president with your speeches at the United Nations, and you gave your views about how, in fact, it should be the General Assembly and all the countries that are not necessarily part of those five that control the Security Council, which should, in fact, have the major power, and instead it is the reverse, and that is something that has been argued by many others as well. You did also speak about occupied Kashmir and the need for Kashmiris to have the right to self-determination. That is something that, of course, Prime Minister Imran Khan, as well as Pakistan, have been demanding for many, many years through, of course, the medium of the United Nations, through which that referendum should be done in a free and fair fashion for all Kashmiris. You also spoke about the differences between Muslim/Islamic nations and the fact that we do need to sit together and work out those differences, and the fact that our commonalities and areas of mutual interest are a lot more than any differences that may exist between us. And in fact, it is extra-regional powers that play up our differences and seek to divide us through that. You spoke about good relations with Pakistan as being important, and import, export, and trade between the two sides should increase for the benefit of both nations, and that is something that I'm sure both governments are working on at this point. You also spoke there towards the end about the Afghan peace process and the importance of that for both Afghanistan and Pakistan, and of course Iran and regional stability as a whole. And right at the end, then we spoke about the Iranian governing system as well, and you said that we need governments around the world that represent people, and that the Iranian governance system came to the fore to represent the people, and it needs to ensure that it continues doing that going forward as well. I'll leave it there for now. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.